The rancher took her in without questions, until she whispered the one name he never expected to hear. The ranch lay quiet under the early morning sky, bathed in soft golden light. Rows of fences stretched across the wide fields, separating pastures filled with grazing horses and cattle. A gentle breeze rustled the tall grass, carrying the faint smell of hay and earth. Birds sang quietly in the trees near the farmhouse, welcoming the dawn with small chirps. On the porch, the rancher stood with his hands resting on the railing, taking a slow breath. His face was weathered, his hands strong from years of hard work. Yet there was a calmness in his eyes, the kind of calm that comes from knowing and accepting life's ups and downs. Life on the ranch had always been simple, but it was a life he loved, a life of responsibility, routine, and the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's work well done. He had learned long ago that the world could be both kind and cruel. In his younger days, he had seen people who took advantage of others' kindness, and he had learned to be cautious. Yet in all that time, he had never regretted helping anyone in need. That principle guided him now as he sipped his morning coffee, the steam rising softly into the crisp air. The sun climbed slowly, and he turned to check the barn. The horses whinnied softly, and a few cows moved closer to the fence, curious as always when he walked by. He was beginning his day like any other when a sudden sound broke the quiet. Footsteps, not the familiar clatter of hooves, not the soft scurry of a wild animal, but human footsteps, hesitant and uneven, brow furrowed. No one ever came here unannounced. The ranch was far from the main road, and strangers were rare. He set down his coffee and walked toward the noise, keeping a careful eye on the tree line. Shadows stretched long. It was a young woman, dressed in worn clothes, carrying a small bag that looked far too heavy for her. She stopped a few feet from the edge of the field, her chest rising and falling rapidly as though she had run a long way. Her hair was tangled, and her face showed exhaustion. More than that, there was fear in her eyes, quiet but unmistakable. The rancher's first instinct was to call out, to ask who she was and why she was here. But something about the way she froze at the sight of him told him that questions might only make things worse. Instead, he stayed quiet, taking a few steps closer but keeping a safe distance. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and steady. "Bray, you need help?" The woman's eyes flicked to him, and for a long moment she did not speak. Then, in a voice so soft it barely carried, she nodded. The rancher didn't push further. He motioned for her to follow him toward the house. The way she walked was slow, careful, almost as if she were testing whether she could trust him. The rancher had learned long ago that trust could not be rushed. Inside the farmhouse, the smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. The rancher moved around the kitchen, pulling out a warm blanket and a cup of tea. The young woman sat at the small wooden table, her hands wrapped around the cup as though holding onto it could keep her safe. He placed a plate of food in front of her, simple, filling, and warm. "Bread."
"Eat," he said gently. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in a while." She hesitated, then slowly took a bite.
Her hands shook slightly, and her eyes darted around the room, taking in the walls, the furniture, the small details of a life she had clearly never known.
He watched her carefully, noticing the way she flinched at every sudden sound, the way she seemed to shrink into herself.
There was a story here. For the first few hours, neither of them spoke much. The rancher went about his work, feeding the animals, checking fences, making sure everything on the ranch ran smoothly. Yet he kept glancing toward the house, toward the small figure quietly eating at the table. There was something about her, something fragile yet resilient, that stirred a protective feeling within him. He had seen people broken by life before, but this was different. As the day passed, the young woman began to relax slightly. She ate more, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Thank you," she said. I didn't know where else to go." The rancher nodded, offering a small smile. "You're safe here," he said. "No one's going to hurt you. You can stay as long as you need."
She looked down at her hands clutching the edge of the table.
For a moment it seemed like she might speak, then stopped. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft clatter of dishes and the distant calls of animals outside. The rancher didn't push. He had learned that sometimes the safest thing you could do for someone was to let them come to you in their own time. Evening began to fall, and the rancher lit the old lanterns that hung on the porch. The warm glow cast gentle shadows across the wooden walls of the farmhouse. The young woman sat by the window looking out at the wide fields. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet sadness there, the kind that comes from carrying a heavy burden alone. The rancher stepped onto the porch to check the fences one last time. The air was cooler now, and the sky had turned shades of pink and purple. As he worked, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Something about this young woman, the way she had appeared out of nowhere, there was more beneath the surface, and he was determined in his quiet, steady way to keep her safe until she was ready to share it. Night came quickly over the ranch, and the house felt warm and safe. The rancher went to check on her before turning in for the night. She was sitting by the fire, wrapped in the blanket he had given her, staring into the flickering flames. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she seemed ready to flee at any sudden noise. He knelt slightly, resting a hand gently on the back of a chair.
He glances around in despair. "You can sleep here tonight," he said quietly. "I'll be nearby if you need anything."
No questions, no pressure, just rest, breaths. Her eyes met his briefly, and then she looked away. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire. Then, in a voice so soft it barely carried, she whispered something that made the rancher freeze. It was a single name, spoken almost like a prayer, almost like a warning. The sound of it hit him like a sudden gust of wind, stirring memories he had buried deep. His hand tightened slightly on the chair, his knuckles white, and for a moment he could not speak. She noticed the reaction, but said nothing further. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken questions, and a strange tension neither of them yet understood. The rancher stepped back, giving her space, though his mind raced. That name. He thought he would never hear it again. And yet here it was, whispered in the quiet of his home, carried by someone he had only just met. The night stretched on, calm, yet filled with quiet anticipation. Round. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and the animals settled into their stalls and pastures. Inside, the young woman curled under the blanket, finally letting herself relax enough to close her eyes. Rancher stayed awake longer, thinking. Breaths. He didn't know her story yet, and he didn't know why she had come to his ranch. But one thing was certain. He would not let anything happen to her. Breath. That promise, quiet and unspoken, was already made. And as he finally lay down to rest, he knew that whatever awaited them, the day after this one would begin a journey neither of them could have expected. The next morning, the ranch was bathed in a soft golden light. The air carried the smell of damp earth and hay, the kind of smell that made anyone who loved the land feel grounded. The rancher was already up, checking fences and feeding the animals, as he did every morning. Yet his thoughts were not on the routine today. They kept returning to the young woman who had appeared the night before. Her whispered name had unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He had not expected it, not from her, and certainly not in this quiet place that had always been his refuge from the past. He carried a quiet tension as he moved about the ranch. Each horse he brushed, each stall he cleaned, each fence he checked felt heavier, as if that single whispered word weighed down the air around him. But he kept his voice calm, his movements steady, but inside, memories stirred. Memories of a person he thought he would never see again. A name tied to betrayal, loss, and questions that had haunted him for years. He tried to push it aside, focusing on the chores, on the work, on the animals, but it was impossible. Meanwhile, the young woman had not emerged from the farmhouse. She had spent the early morning hours quietly observing the ranch from the kitchen window, her fingers tracing the rim of a cup of tea as she sipped slowly. Breaths. She watched the rancher move about, noting the strength in his hands, the calm precision in his. But she was beginning to notice details. How he treated even the smallest creatures with respect. How he never raised his voice, and how there was a quiet steadiness in him that made her feel, for the first time in a long while, that she could breathe. When he finally stepped into the house, carrying a plate of breakfast, the young woman glanced up. Her eyes, still shadowed with fear and uncertainty, met his. She looked as though she wanted to say something but didn't know how. He set the plate in front of her and spoke gently. "Eat." "You need your strength." She nodded slightly, picking up her fork. Every bite seemed cautious at first, as though she was testing whether she was allowed to feel safe here. Brrrr. He watched her carefully, noticing the way her eyes occasionally darted to the door, the window, even the corners of the room. She was alert, wary, but not entirely distrustful. It was progress. After breakfast, the rancher decided to let her explore the ranch slowly. Under his watchful eye, he led her through the fields, showing her the fences, the barns, and the small creek that ran along the edge of the property. She asked few questions, keeping her gaze low. But he could sense her curiosity. The quiet beauty of the land seemed to draw her in. She touched the coarse grass, ran her fingers along the smooth fence posts, and paused by the creek, watching the water ripple over the stones. As they walked, the rancher tried to make small talk, keeping his tone light and conversational. "Do you know much about animals?" he asked. She shrugged, a faint smile touching her lips. "A little. I've helped take care of a few, but not like this." "Not so many at once." He nodded, understanding more than she realized. "They're creatures of habit. They respond to kindness and patience more than anything else." "That goes for people, too," he added softly. For a moment it seemed as though she might respond, but she only nodded and turned her attention back to the fields. Her silence was not resistance. It was careful observation, a way of measuring whether she could trust him. And the rancher, in his quiet, steady way, understood that trust was not something that could be demanded. By midday, they returned to the farmhouse. The young woman helped with small tasks, sweeping the floor, stacking firewood, and carrying water. Each task seemed to ground her, to give her purpose beyond the fear that had brought her here. The rancher observed her closely, noticing the way her hands trembled at first but steadied with each task, the way her back straightened slightly as she moved with quiet determination. She was fragile in some ways, but there was resilience in her that he respected deeply. The afternoon passed, and the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. They worked together to feed the animals and check on the fences, the rancher giving her simple instructions and corrections in a calm, patient manner. Occasionally, she would glance at him, her eyes seeking reassurance, and he would nod or offer a small smile. No words were needed. The trust between them was growing quietly, almost imperceptibly. As evening approached, the young woman finally spoke. Her voice was low, hesitant, but there was a weight behind it that caught the rancher off guard. I need to tell you something, she said. She paused, looking down at her hands. I didn't come here by accident. I didn't have anywhere else to go. But there's more. Someone I left behind. And it's connected to that name, I whispered last night. The rancher's heart tightened. He did not speak immediately, giving her space.
He had learned.
Instead, he simply nodded, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath, her shoulders tense, and began to speak in fragments, each word careful and measured. I was afraid. I didn't know who to trust. And when I heard that name again, I thought maybe there was someone who could help me, someone who would keep me safe. The rancher's mind raced. That name had been part of his past, part of a time he had worked hard to forget. Breath. Yet here it was, carried to him by someone he barely knew, someone who needed him. He felt a mix of anger, worry, and protectiveness, a tangled knot of emotions he had not expected to feel so strongly. He decided to focus on the immediate need, keeping her safe. He asked gently, "Do you want to stay here tonight? Just rest?"
She nodded quickly, relief washing over her face. Yes,
I think I need that. Night fell over the ranch again, and the stars blinked softly in the sky. The young woman sat by the fire, wrapped in the blanket he had given her, watching the flames flicker and dance. The rancher, sitting across the room, kept an eye on her. There was an unspoken understanding between them. She needed space to process, and he was there to provide it. Hours passed, and the rancher noticed something subtle in her behavior. Round. She flinched at every sudden sound, her eyes darting to the window whenever a branch tapped against the glass. He realized that her fear was not just about the present, it was about the past, the name she had whispered, and the person behind it. He had faced difficult situations before, but protecting someone who carried such visible fear brought a new kind of responsibility. The next day, he decided to gently ask more about the name, careful not to alarm her. "If you want to tell me about it, I'll listen," he said quietly as they worked together feeding the animals. "No judgment, best." Her hands froze for a moment, but then she nodded. I don't know where to start," she admitted. "I left because I was scared." And that name. It's someone from my past. Someone I thought I'd never see again. I thought if I ran far enough I could forget them. But then...
I didn't know where else to go.
The rancher felt the weight of her words settle between them. He understood more now, her silence, her fear, the way she had come to him without explanation. He realized that sometimes people arrive in our lives at the exact moment they are meant to, carrying their pain and trust together. And sometimes it is up to those willing to help to honor that trust. But he continued to work alongside her, showing her small tasks that required attention and patience. He noticed the way she was learning quickly, how she began to anticipate the animal's needs, and how she started to relax just enough to let small smiles appear on her face. Each day she became a little more confident, a little less afraid, though the shadow of that whispered name still lingered. Evening fell once again and the rancher made them dinner. They sat at the table, eating quietly, but the tension had eased slightly. She finally looked up at him and said, "I feel like I can trust you. Maybe for the first time in a long time, I feel safe."
He nodded,
a faint smile crossing his face. "You're safe here."
That's all that matters for now. The rest, we'll handle it together when you're ready. As the night deepened, she curled up under her blanket, glancing occasionally at the window. The rancher stayed nearby, working quietly on a small task, but always aware of her presence. The day had been long, filled with small steps toward trust and understanding. And though there was still much left unsaid, between the flickering fire and the rustling wind outside, the whispered name lingered. It was a shadow from the past, a connection neither of them fully understood yet, but it was also a bridge. It had brought her to him, and it was slowly beginning to teach both of them that trust, patience, and courage could begin in the most unexpected ways. By the time the rancher finally prepared for bed, he knew that the next day would bring more questions, more revelations, and perhaps the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined. But for now he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He had kept her safe, and she had started to let him in. That was enough. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, casting a warm, gentle glow across the fields. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of grass, earth, and the animals grazing quietly in their pastures. The rancher moved about his chores as usual, feeding the horses, checking the fences, and making sure everything on the property was in order. But today, there was a weight in his chest he couldn't ignore. The whispered name from the young woman haunted his thoughts, and he knew it was time to learn more about why she had come to him and what fear had driven her to his door. He found her in the kitchen, quietly sipping tea and staring out the window at the distant hills. She looked tired, but her posture had changed slightly. She no longer shrank from the world as much. There was a cautious strength in the way she held herself, a resilience the rancher admired. He carried a plate of breakfast to the table and set it in front of her, keeping his tone gentle. "Eat. You'll need your strength today." She nodded but did not speak immediately. Her eyes remained on the horizon, as if the rising sun offered. The rancher took a seat across from her, careful not to rush her into words she wasn't ready to share. He understood that trust had to be earned, especially when fear had been a constant companion in someone's life. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet and hesitant. I think I can tell you now." She paused, her fingers twisting the edge of her cup. "But it's not easy. Psst. I left because I was scared. That name, it belongs to someone I thought I'd never see again. And now, I don't know what will happen."
The rancher listened intently, keeping his expression calm.
He knew that this was the moment when patience mattered more than anything. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "Take your time. I'll listen whenever you're ready." Breath. She drew a deep breath and began her story, carefully choosing her words. "I grew up in a small town," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It was a place where everyone knew everyone else, but not everyone was kind. There was someone who had power over me, over my family in a way I couldn't escape. I trusted them once, but they betrayed me. I didn't think I could ever forgive them, or even face them again." Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, determined not to break down completely. The rancher reached out, resting a hand lightly on the table, a silent gesture of support. He had seen pain like this before, but hearing it directly from someone's lips brought a new level of gravity. "They were dangerous," she continued, her voice shaking. "Not in the way that people always think, but dangerous because of the control they had over my life. I couldn't breathe, couldn't make decisions for myself. I had to get away, or I would lose myself entirely. So I ran. I didn't know where to go, only that I had to keep moving. And then, I found you. I didn't know why, but something told me you would help me. He understood now why the whispered name had struck him so hard. It was a name tied to his own past, someone he had thought he had left behind long ago. Memories he had tried to forget, anger, disappointment, and betrayal, surfaced unexpectedly. Yet, looking at the young woman across from him, he realized that the past was not what mattered right now. Her safety was what mattered. "Thank you for trusting me," he said finally. Inspiration. "I can't promise that everything will be easy, but I can promise that I'll do what I can to keep you safe. That's all I can do." She nodded, relief mingling with lingering fear. I just didn't know who else to turn to," she admitted. "And that name, it's tied to so many things I've tried to forget." Hearing it again, I didn't know if I could handle it. The rancher understood. Break. Sometimes the past had a way of catching up with people, even when they thought it was far behind, but the present, he reminded himself, was what they could control. And in this moment he controlled the safety of the young woman sitting before him. They spent the rest of the morning tending to the animals, her hand steadying as she worked alongside him. He gave her small tasks that required attention and patience, feeding the chickens, brushing the horses, and checking water troughs. Each task seemed to ground her, to give her a sense of purpose beyond the fear that had haunted her. Grasp. She began to smile occasionally, small, hesitant smiles that made the rancher feel a quiet satisfaction. By midday, they took a break under the shade of a large oak tree. The young woman leaned back against the trunk, her eyes closed for a moment as she listened to the wind rustling through the leaves. The rancher sat beside her, a respectful distance away, letting her enjoy the calm without intrusion. "You're doing well," he said quietly. "I grasp." She opened her eyes and looked at him, a flicker of gratitude in her expression.
I feel safer than I have in a long time, she admitted. I didn't think I could feel safe again.
"But being here, it's different. You make me feel like I can breathe." The rancher nodded, silently acknowledging the weight of her words. He had seen fear consume people before, and he knew how liberating it could be to feel even a small measure of safety. For him, helping her regain that sense of security was more important than any past pain or complicated history tied to the name she had whispered. As afternoon turned to evening, the atmosphere on the ranch remained calm, but the shadow of the whispered name lingered. The young woman began to reveal small fragments of her life before she arrived, memories of moments both good and bad, times when she had hoped someone would rescue her but was disappointed. The rancher listened carefully, offering quiet encouragement when she faltered and gentle guidance when she seemed unsure of herself. "The past can be heavy," he said at one point, "but it doesn't define you. You've come here and you've taken steps to protect yourself. That shows strength, more than you realize." Her eyes softened as she looked at him, a spark of hope returning. "I never thought I had strength," she admitted. "I always thought I was just surviving. But being here, with someone who doesn't judge me, it feels different." Night began to fall, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. The rancher prepared a simple dinner, and they ate together quietly. The young woman's laughter came more easily now, small but genuine, as she shared stories of past mistakes and lessons learned. For the first time since her arrival, the atmosphere felt lighter, though the tension beneath the surface, the tension tied to the name she had whispered. The rancher showed her the creek that ran along the property. the water sparkling in the fading light. She paused, watching the reflection of the sky in the rippling water. Burst. I think I'm ready to face it, she said finally, her voice steady. I don't know if I can, but I want to. I want to stop running from it, even if it's hard. The rancher nodded, sensing the courage in her words. You won't have to face it alone, he assured her. Whatever comes, we'll handle it together. The evening settled into quiet. The stars appeared in the sky, twinkling faintly as the ranch grew darker around them. Inside the farmhouse, she curled under the blanket he had given her, feeling a measure of comfort she hadn't known in years. The rancher worked quietly nearby, keeping an ear out for any disturbance, but allowing her the space to process the day's revelations. Hours passed, and the quiet bond between them grew stronger. She had shared pieces of her past, the story behind the whispered name, and he had listened without judgment, offering safety and support. It was a small but significant step toward healing, both for her and, in some ways, for him. The name that had once been a source of fear was now a thread connecting them, a reason for trust and cautious hope. As he prepared for bed, the rancher reflected on the day. He realized that the young woman's arrival had disrupted the routine of his life in ways he hadn't expected. Yet he also knew that the quiet strength she was discovering within herself mirrored the values he had always held: resilience, patience, and courage in the face of uncertainty. And, though the whispered name still lingered like a shadow on the edge of their lives, it was no longer purely a symbol of fear. It had become a key, opening the possibility of trust, understanding, and ultimately, hope. Her story was far from complete, and the challenges tied to her past were still waiting. But for tonight they both rested with the knowledge that they had taken another step forward, together. The ranch was quiet under the night sky, the animals sleeping peacefully, the wind moving gently through the trees. Inside the farmhouse, two lives had begun to intertwine, linked by trust, courage, and the faint but growing hope that even the hardest past could be faced, and eventually overcome. The next morning, the ranch was quiet under a pale early light. Dew glistened on the grass, and the faint smell of earth and hay carried in the cool breeze. The young woman was awake before the rancher, sitting by the window with her cup of tea, her thoughts heavy but determined. Today felt different. The tension that had shadowed her since her arrival was still there, but mingled now with courage, a courage that had grown slowly with the rancher's quiet support and the small victories of trust and safety. The rancher entered the kitchen, carrying a plate of breakfast. He noticed her posture, straight, composed, her eyes sharper than usual. Brassed. Something in her had changed. "Good morning," he said gently. "You seem ready." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "I think I am," she said. "I can't stay running forever. Today, I need to face what I ran from."
"I'm scared, but I can't hide anymore."
The rancher nodded, silently acknowledging her courage. "You won't face it alone," he said.
"Whatever comes, I'll be here. That's my promise." They ate in silence for a few minutes, each lost in thought. The rancher thought about the challenges that lay ahead, about the person connected to the whispered name, and about the delicate balance between protection and confrontation. The young woman thought about the fear she had carried for so long, the person she had tried to forget, and the steps she had taken to reclaim control. After breakfast, they prepared for the journey. The rancher gathered a few supplies, water, some food, and blankets, while the young woman packed a small bag. Her hands were steady now, her movements purposeful. She was no longer the fragile, fearful person who had arrived at the ranch days ago. She had grown stronger, braver, and more determined with each passing day. As they walked toward the edge of the property, she hesitated. I don't know what will happen, she said softly. I've imagined it 1,000 ways, but reality might be worse.
The rancher looked at her with calm reassurance.
Reality is always uncertain, he said. But you're ready. And you have me beside you. That makes a difference. The journey to confront the past was not far, but it felt long in their minds. They drove along dusty roads, past fields and forests, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. Both were thinking, both bracing for the confrontation to come. The rancher focused on keeping the young woman calm, offering small comments about the passing scenery, the changing light, and the animals grazing by the road. Rasp. She responded with quiet nods and small smiles, absorbing the ordinary beauty around her as a shield against the fear building in her chest. Finally, they arrived. The place was familiar, tied to painful memories. An old building, now quiet, once filled with authority, control, and fear. The young woman's heart pounded, but she drew a steadying breath and stepped out of the car. The rancher stayed close, a silent pillar of support. She paused at the doorway, her hand resting on the frame. The whispered name had led her here, and now she would face it fully. The person behind the name emerged, surprised at her arrival. Their expression shifted from curiosity to recognition, and then to something sharper. Discomfort.
She began, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. I didn't come here to run anymore.
I came to speak the truth. I came to say that I won't be controlled or afraid again.
The person frowned, their eyes narrowing.
You shouldn't be here, they said, voice tense.
This doesn't concern you anymore. The young woman held her ground, feeling the strength she had built over days at the ranch. It concerns me because it's part of my life, she said firmly.
I've carried fear for too long. I've allowed it to define me, but not anymore.
The rancher stepped forward slightly, a quiet but powerful presence. You're safe now, he said to her. Right. She's right. She's stronger than she realizes, and you will not have control over her anymore. For a moment, the air between them was thick with tension. Then the person connected to the whispered name shifted, perhaps realizing that the young woman was no longer the scared person they had once known. She had courage, allies, and a future that would not be dictated by past fears. The power dynamic had changed. The young woman spoke again, her voice calm but firm.
I forgive myself for being afraid, and I forgive you for the past, but I will not let it control me. I am free now, and I am taking back my life.
The rancher watched her, pride and relief washing over him. He had witnessed her transformation, from a frightened stranger to someone who stood tall and faced the past head-on. Breath, she had grown stronger in ways he had known were possible, but had never seen so clearly until now. The person connected to the name took a step back, the tension in their shoulders easing. Perhaps they realized that their influence was gone, that fear no longer had a hold. For the young woman, this moment was more than confrontation. It was liberation. Breath. She had faced the shadow of the past and emerged with dignity. The young woman was quieter now, reflective but lighter in spirit. The rancher noticed the change immediately. The tightness in her shoulders had eased. Her steps were more confident, and the shadow of fear had lifted from her eyes. Over the next days, life on the ranch returned to its gentle rhythm. She worked with the animals, helped with the chores, and gradually opened up more fully. They laughed together, shared stories, and planned small projects around the property. The bond between them, built on trust, patience, and quiet courage, had deepened. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they sat together on the porch. The young woman looked out over the fields, feeling a sense of belonging she had never known before. I never thought I could feel this at peace, she said softly. The rancher nodded, a faint smile crossing his face.
You've earned it, he said. You've faced your fear, reclaimed your strength, and taken control of your life. That's more than many people ever manage.
She turned to him, gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you, she said, for taking me in, for trusting me, and for helping me find my courage. I wouldn't have been able to do this without you. The rancher shrugged modestly. Breaths, you did it yourself, he said. I just helped keep you safe. That night, as the stars appeared above the ranch and the animals settled into their stalls and pastures, the young woman felt a sense of completeness she had never imagined possible. The whispered name that had brought fear, uncertainty, and tension was no longer a shadow over her life. It was a reminder of how far she had come, of the courage she had found within herself, and of the people who had stood by her when she needed them most. The rancher sat nearby, quiet but vigilant as always, knowing that life would continue with its challenges and surprises. Draves had helped someone find safety, strength, and hope, and in doing so he had witnessed the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. The night passed quietly. The young woman slept soundly for the first time in years, unburdened by fear, and the rancher watched over the ranch with a sense of fulfillment. In the morning they would rise to new routines, new tasks, and the quiet joy of life lived fully and freely. Together they had faced the past, confronted fear, and found resolution. And though the future would surely bring new challenges, they both knew that they had each other, and that was enough. The ranch, the fields, and the animals remained constant, but the young woman's life had changed forever. She had reclaimed her strength, her voice, and her freedom. As dawn broke once again over the ranch, the young woman stepped outside, breathing in the crisp air and feeling the weight of the past fall away. The rancher stood beside her, a steady presence, ready for whatever came next. They exchanged a quiet smile, the kind that speaks volumes without words. It was a smile of triumph, relief, and new beginnings. For the young woman, the whispered name was no longer a source of fear. It was a mark of the journey she had completed, a journey of courage, trust, and transformation. And for the rancher, it was a reminder of why he lived this life: to help, to protect, and to witness the strength of those willing to face their fears and take back control of their lives. In the end, the ranch became more than a home. It became a sanctuary. And together they would continue, grounded in trust, courage, and the knowledge that even